Sarah's hands trembled as she rocked her baby in the corner of the office break room, praying he wouldn't cry again. The smell of burnt coffee clung to the air, but all she could smell was the faint scent of baby powder on his blanket, a smell that reminded her of both love and fear. The sitter had canceled that morning. Her rent was due in 4 days. Her fridge had half a carton of milk and a jar of pickles. She had no one, no parents, no partner, no one to call. So she brought her baby to work, thinking she could keep him quiet, finish her shift, and no one would notice. But people noticed. By lunchtime, her boss called her into his office. He didn't ask about her baby. He didn't ask if she was okay. He just said one sentence, cold and final. "You're done here." She stood frozen. Her heart pounded so loud she could barely hear his voice anymore. He was still talking, about policies, about rules. But all Sarah heard was the sound of her own life collapsing. She carried her son through the parking lot, blinking against the hot sting of tears, whispering over and over, "We're going to be okay. I promise." But she didn't believe it. That night, she rocked him to sleep in their tiny apartment, not knowing that years later, fate would bring her face to face with someone who would change everything. Someone who would make her believe in miracles again. Because 2 decades later, Sarah would walk into a job interview, and the man sitting across from her would smile and say, "You probably don't remember me, but I remember you. I was that baby." If you think you've heard emotional stories before, think again. This one will stay with you long after the final words are spoken. Watch until the end, because the ending will rewrite the way you see kindness, sacrifice, and the power of time. The morning after Sarah was fired, the world felt colder. She woke up to the soft cooing of her baby boy, Jacob, lying beside her on the worn-out mattress. Sunlight leaked through the blinds, catching dust in the air, tiny floating reminders of how still, how heavy, her life felt in that moment. Her fridge held a bottle of formula, half empty. No bread, no eggs, just the stubborn hum of the appliance mocking her emptiness. She poured the last of the formula into a bottle, whispering to Jacob, "This is all we have left today, buddy." Rent was due in 4 days. The eviction notice would come if she couldn't pay. She tried to push away the panic, but it pressed against her chest like a weight she couldn't breathe under. Her phone buzzed, a text from her landlord, "We need to talk." Another from her sister she hadn't spoken to in months. "I told you it wouldn't work out. You need to give him up for adoption before you ruin both your lives." Sarah sat on the couch, holding Jacob close, the tears finally spilling. She thought about what her sister said, not for the first time. She had nothing to give him but love. But was love enough? She tried to find work. She called old contacts, scrolled through job listings, filled out applications with one hand while holding Jacob in the other. No one wanted to hire a single mother with no childcare and no flexible schedule. The days blurred together, diaper changes, endless job rejections, counting pennies in a jar to afford the bus fare to yet another interview that would lead nowhere. She'd walk into an office with hope, only to feel it shatter when they asked, "So, who'll be watching your son while you work?" Every night, she promised Jacob, "Mommy's going to make this better." But in the quiet hours, when the city slept and the world was still, she let herself imagine a future where she failed him, and it broke her. What she didn't know was that life was slowly circling back toward her. That one decision made in desperation all those years ago would become the very thing that saved her. It was a gray Wednesday morning when Sarah walked into yet another interview, her heart heavy but her chin held high. She had borrowed bus fare from a neighbor and dressed in the only blouse she owned that didn't have a stain. Jacob, now 2 years old, was left with Mrs. Collins from down the hall, a kind old woman who watched him for free when she could. The building was nothing like the cafes and small shops she had worked in before. It was tall, glass, and intimidating, with a polished marble lobby that made her worn-out shoes squeak uncomfortably. The receptionist's smile was polite but cool, the kind that made her feel like she didn't belong. She was led into a spacious office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A man stood by the window, hands in his pockets. Tall, sharply dressed. His presence filled the room before he even turned to face her. "Sarah Miller?" he asked, his voice warm but measured. "Yes," she replied, clutching her folder of resumes that suddenly felt embarrassingly thin. He gestured for her to sit. I've read your application. You've had quite a few jobs over the years. She nodded, her cheeks flushing. I've done my best, sir. Life's been complicated. He leaned forward. I like people who've been through complicated. They tend to work harder. But I have to ask, why did you leave your last long-term position? Her throat tightened. She thought about lying, but the truth pushed its way out. I brought my son to work one day when I couldn't find childcare. My boss said it was unprofessional. I was fired on the spot. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. His gaze softened, and something flickered across his face. A shadow of recognition, maybe. You brought your baby to work, he repeated quietly, almost to himself. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. Yes, I had no choice. Then he smiled, but not the kind of smile she expected. This one was filled with something deeper. You know, he said slowly, I was that baby once. Sarah blinked, confused. I don't understand. He leaned back in his chair, eyes never leaving hers. 28 years ago, my mother was working at a diner. She brought me to work one day, just like you did. She was fired for it. And I've never forgotten how hard she worked, how much she sacrificed. That day shaped my entire life. Her breath caught in her chest. The room felt smaller, quieter, as if the city outside had faded away. She had no idea yet that the connection he was about to reveal would not only change her fate, but rewrite the story she thought she was living. Sarah sat frozen in her chair, her resume slipping slightly from her fingers. The man, whose name she now remembered from the receptionist's introduction as Daniel Reeves, leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. My mother, he began, his voice lower now, was a single parent. She worked double shifts at a diner just to keep a roof over our heads. One morning, her babysitter canceled at the last minute. She didn't have anyone else. She brought me to work and tucked me in a booth with a coloring book. Sarah could picture it instantly, a little boy scribbling with crayons while his mother rushed between tables. Daniel's jaw tightened. A customer complained, said it was unprofessional, unsafe even. The owner came out, in front of the whole diner, and told her to grab her kid and leave. She begged him not to fire her. She told him she needed this job to keep us fed. He didn't care. That was the last day she ever worked there. Sarah swallowed hard. It was her story, word for word. I remember, Daniel continued, his gaze locked on hers, watching my mother cry in the kitchen that night while she tried to make me grilled cheese from stale bread. She thought I was too young to remember, but I did. I remembered everything. For a moment, his voice caught, almost imperceptibly, before he composed himself. She worked even harder after that. And eventually, she built a small catering business from nothing. But she never forgot how people treated her when she was down. Neither did I. Sarah's chest tightened. She didn't know whether she wanted to cry, apologize, or just sit there and absorb the fact that this man, this powerful CEO, had lived the same pain she was living now. He leaned back in his chair and said quietly, When I read your file, something in your story felt familiar. Now I know why. Her mind swirled with questions, but before she could speak, Daniel added, I made a promise to myself as a boy. If I ever had the power to help someone like my mother, I'd do it. No hesitation. Sarah's heartbeat quickened. She didn't know it yet, but this wasn't just an interview anymore. It was the beginning of something far bigger than a job offer. Sarah sat rigid in her chair, still reeling from what Daniel had just revealed. The air between them felt charged, heavy with unspoken understanding. Daniel exhaled slowly, then reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder. He placed it on the desk but didn't open it. Instead, he leaned forward again, his eyes steady on hers. I'm going to be blunt with you, Sarah, he said. I don't care what the HR department says, or what the so-called company's standards are. You're not just getting this job, you're getting more than that. Sarah blinked, not sure she had heard him right. What do you mean? She asked. Daniel's voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable intensity in it. I've seen the way the world punishes single mothers, how it forces them to choose between feeding their children and keeping a paycheck. I'm not going to let that happen to you. Her breath caught in her throat. You have the position, he continued. And I'll make sure you're paid enough to take care of your son without having to leave him with strangers if you don't want to. Flexible hours. Work from home if needed. And yes, his lips curved into a small, knowing smile. If you ever have to bring your child to the office, you can. No questions asked. Sarah stared at him, utterly speechless. She wasn't used to kindness without a catch. This isn't charity, Daniel said, sensing her hesitation. You're qualified. More than qualified. But I also know that when a mother doesn't have to fight for survival every single day, she can do incredible things. I'm investing in that. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, Sarah felt the weight on her chest lighten just a little. But then another thought hit her, and her voice wavered as she asked, Why? Why go this far for me? You don't even know me. Daniel's expression softened. I don't have to know you, he said. I know your fight. I've lived it. And if someone had stepped in for my mother when she needed it most, maybe she wouldn't have had to sacrifice as much as she did. This, he gestured between them, is my chance to be that person for someone else. Sarah's eyes stung, and she quickly blinked to keep the tears from falling. Daniel slid the folder toward her. This is your official offer. Sign it, and we can start next week. Or sooner. The choice is yours. Her hand hovered over the pen, her mind spinning. She had walked into this office thinking she was here to beg for a job. She was leaving with something much bigger. An opportunity, a lifeline, and a reminder that sometimes life's full circles are more beautiful than we could ever plan. When Mia finally stood on the balcony of her new office, a place she once thought she'd never belong, she wasn't just looking at the skyline. She was looking at her journey, every painful step, every tear-filled night, every no that had led to a better yes. Her new company had grown, and so had she. And when she saw new mothers in the office, nervously rocking their babies, afraid of being a burden, she would smile and whisper, It's okay. I understand. I was you. Because Mia had learned that sometimes, life will push you to rock bottom, not to bury you, but to plant you. And when you grow, you don't just rise for yourself. You rise for those who will come after you. To her, losing that first job wasn't a curse. It was a door to a life she never imagined. A life where compassion was as valuable as skill, and kindness was the currency that made businesses thrive. Mia's story is proof that no matter how unfair the world seems, no matter how hopeless the moment feels, your ending hasn't been written yet. You might just be in the middle of a chapter that will make your future even more beautiful. If you've ever felt overlooked, judged, or told you're not enough, remember Mia. And remember that sometimes, the very thing that breaks you might just be the thing that builds you. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a moment where what felt like the end turned out to be the beginning? Share your story in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't just keep it to yourself. Like this video, subscribe for more powerful stories, and share it with someone who needs hope today. Because you never know, you might just change their life.